2021 was a strange year for consumers in the video game industry. Many herald 2021 as the year that did not stop, the year that was relentless. Others might agree that 2021 for video games was relentless, but instead of being a marathon run like in 2018 or a ceaseless long high-octane sprint like 2017, it was more of a long walk. Long, never-ending, and depending on your taste for these kind of things, potentially really f***ing dull. I don't agree with either sentiment, landing somewhere in the middle. Funnily enough, most of my experience with video games in 2021 was catching up with stuff I really couldn't afford at launch in 2020, both in regards to time and monetarily. There were a couple heavy hitters in 2021, but there were no, for want of a better term, firework shows. If you frequent the channel often, you'll be aware of the phrase firework game. I often say there are good games, great games, excellent games, and then there are the firework experiences. What makes a firework experience varies on a game-by-game basis. For example, my upcoming retrospective / analysis on The Last of Us Part 2, currently at 20,000 words, 50 pages and counting, goes quite into depth as to why The Last of Us 2 is a quote-unquote firework show. My Galaxy retrospective this year attempted to explain the same. As time goes on, I will elaborate on the phrase, but the main takeaway is this. A firework game is a video game that simply does more than what 99% of other video games can do. Most are fun, but not all of them have that intangible X factor. Galaxy's fireworks lie in its daringness to be more. The Last of Us Part 2's fireworks lie in its power to make you feel. I could go on, but I trust you see where I'm coming from. A firework game accesses that little nook in the corner of our hearts that few films, books, or games can ever access. When a film, book, or game does, then you know the people behind the project are nothing short of masterminds, because they have crafted a firework experience, something special, something you may not ever play, watch, or read again, but something you will always remember. What makes or breaks a firework experience is entirely subjective, mind you. More often than not, however, what decides whether something reaches the uppermost echelon is if it defines or redefines a genre of your choosing. Take Hades, for example. I'm not a fan of roguelikes, and I'm not really a fan of Hades. I can see clear as day that it oozes quality, that it redefines what a roguelike can be. That's why I wouldn't be surprised if Hades entered someone else's S tier. In 2021, I didn't play any new releases that were firework experiences for me. But that isn't exactly a bad thing. See, if you asked me to give my top 10 from 2020 today, I wouldn't be able to. Certainly I'd remember the firework experiences because there were a bizarrely plentiful amount of them in 2020. There was obviously The Last of Us Part 2, the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Animal Crossing New Horizons. I haven't yet tried Half-Life Alyx despite finally now owning all the equipment necessary. I have no doubt that it'll be special, but I can't formulate an opinion just yet. Off the top of my head, that's 3 that immediately went into the revered greatest of all time list, and one that certainly has the potential to. I would be remiss not to mention Hades. That game has the production value comparable to the best the AAA market has to offer and is rightfully beloved by many. I think it's amazing, but I don't have that much fun playing it, which is absolutely 100,000% a me problem. I am jealous of those who like Hades. But apart from those 3 tentpole titles, everything else varied in memorability. Doom Eternal missed the uppermost echelon for me. It was just missing that intangible X factor. Perhaps it was the lackluster story, maybe it was the lack of interesting innovation, or it's possible that it's because Eternal was not interested in significantly revolutionizing the first-person shooter genre, rather intent on adding to it. Eternal felt like a DLC rather than a new experience. I know many adored it, as did I, but I can guarantee that in 10 years I won't remember Doom Eternal like I remember, say, the Final Fantasy VII Remake. It was great, but not great enough to remember in 10 years' time. I genuinely had to Google video games that came out in 2020 just to refresh my memory. I don't need to do that with 2017 or 2018, and I don't need to do it with 2021 either. One could argue this is simply recency bias, but I disagree. In the beginning days of this channel, I toyed with a Game of the Year style video like this to mark the end of 2020. I found my script a few days ago. I stopped writing it back in the Christmas of 2020 because I could only remember 5 original games, 2 of which were only okay. And that's not even talking about all of the disastrous controversy and lackluster experiences rushed out the door to meet deadlines. Naturally, the first game to come to mind is Cyberpunk, a game which, to preface, I wasn't even remotely hyped about. All I knew was that Keanu Reeves was in it, and that said, not even that could make me care. It's borderline sacrilegious to say, but I've never watched any of the Matrix films, or any of the John Wick films either. I had no hype whatsoever. So I watched as the Cyberpunk train came crashing into the station on fire with no wheels, and with all the drivers having abandoned ship 12 stops ago. And I felt nothing, because I didn't care. Out of the desire to try out my new graphics card, I picked it up cheap in a sale more than 6 months after launch, on PC after many updates. I didn't experience any significant, memorable glitches, and still didn't have fun. To be brief, I just don't think Cyberpunk tells a good enough story to warrant its lackluster gameplay, and its gameplay isn't good enough to carry a disappointing story. What's more, I thought this would be the game to finally top unique, artistic, revolutionary titles like, say, a Wind Waker HD in the graphical department. Granted, this is entirely subjective, but Wind Waker on the Wii U reigns supreme. Personally, even The Last of Us Part 2 beats out Cyberpunk, but that's for another day. For a retro-futuristic cyber city, Cyberpunk only looks pretty good. The music does the job, sure, but I won't be booting up the soundtrack playlist on YouTube now or ever. And this was what people were heralding as the supposed greatest game of all time. Even now, people declare Cyberpunk underrated. Liking things is the most subjective thing in the world by default, so I would never shoot someone down simply for liking something I don't. What I can do, however, is passionately disagree and explain why. The script for that one is already written. 2020, more than it will be remembered for its games, will be remembered for the toxicity surrounding games discussion. Super Mario 3D All-Stars, one of my personal most treasured releases in the last 10 years, caused a massive stir online, as did Last of Us 2, as did Cyberpunk. And apart from the few fireworks shows, the many controversies, 2020 will be remembered for the wet farts. The games that shouldn't have released in 2020 due to glitches or due to severe lack of inspiration. Watch Dogs, Assassin's Creed, Marvel's Avengers, the list goes on. This is important to mention because, in retrospect, people forget about the disappointments and the controversies, instead remembering the excellency. Is that even a word? Instead remembering the excellency that would likely define the generation. Do not look back with rose-tinted glasses. Yes, I can name 3 releases in 2020 that immediately inserted themselves into my greatest of all time list, whereas 2021 had none, but at least 2021 was more consistently good. 2020 will be remembered well, where 2021 won't be, but I'll tell you, in the moment, 2021 was a better time to enjoy the output of the talented folk in the video game medium. So while there were no boundary-breaking S-tier firework experiences in 2021, there were a lot of A's and B's. I have a couple categories prepared and everything will be checkmarked in the description. This video will be spoiler-free because, as you'll soon find out, if a game is worth delving into spoilers for, it'll get its own dedicated review. Or like what the f*** can be spoiled in Riders Republic? Regardless, here's to another year, hopefully a better one in more ways than just in regards to entertainment. A couple ground rules. I'm going to do my best to keep overlap to an absolute minimum. For example, in the first category I'm going to talk about underrated games. I would love to put Riders Republic in here because it is probably the most underrated game of the year. However, I have a higher honour to bestow upon Riders Republic, so I won't include it there. Finally, the 2 most important pieces of criteria, the 2 facets of a video game release that I routinely check, then check again, to make sure they qualify under my strict set of guidelines. It needs cool box art and it can't be made by these f***os. Before getting to the main attraction, throughout the year I've written down notes on, various little details I've taken an interest in, topics that couldn't fill their own video or topics about games that would never feature on the list. There are a couple of points I'd like to make: the power of a good title, the disgust felt by a bad title, and the power of a scam with mental investment. As anyone who's formed a band, a YouTube channel, a blog, created a fantasy Premier League team, or any other creative endeavour will tell you, choosing a name is the hardest part. As such, I find it a little odd we don't praise development teams enough for choosing excellent names. It's almost a given. The Last of Us is a name that inspires intrigue. Who are the Last of Us? Who are they the last of? Who is us? What is the? The Legend of Zelda does much the same, as does Hades, as does Hollow Knight, as does any From Software title. So if you'll allow it, I'd like to highlight my personal favourite video game title / name of the year. The only thing I know about this game is its name, but I guarantee I could give a pretty stellar plot synopsis based on its title alone. I derive an unusual amount of enjoyment from a well-constructed oxymoron. While this isn't exactly an oxymoron by definition, that would be like a deafening silence, it is two words that probably should never belong in the same sentence, because together they make literally no sense. But it's intriguing, it has a ring to it, and despite knowing a grand total of jack shit about this title, I'm compelled to learn more. And is that not what a title is for, after all? In the worst title / name category, you can take one of two approaches. You can go after the team who obviously just used a name generator, or go after the team who literally just grabbed two popular games, stole a word from each title, and then mashed them together for optimal SEO. One is the height of laziness, the other is, also the height of laziness, but, in a kind of semi-respectable hustler kind of way. Also taking advantage of our inherent name recognition. Regardless, I picked one name from both categories. Eldest Souls. Elden Ring is the most anticipated game of 2022 by Team From Software. Dark Souls is the most critically acclaimed game of the last decade, also by From Software. The name Eldest Souls gives serious, okay, you can copy my homework but change it around a bit vibes. In fairness, the game actually looks well made, with IGN awarding it an 8 out of 10. Perhaps they should have gone with a different name, thus avoiding the ultimate, unforgivable, uncomebackable ridicule of featuring on the worst title segment on the video of a YouTube channel with less than 70 subscribers. Truly, the wolves are at the door when that happens. Then... I don't even want to f***ing say this out loud. Okay. Shadowverse Champions Battle. Rage! This is probably a more deplorable title. It just screams auto-generated title. Well, the title Necro Barista didn't make sense. That would be disparaging. It isn't that it didn't make sense, more that it was intriguing. You think, wow, what does that word mean? I can't wait to find out. With Shadowverse, you just think, what the f*** does that word mean? I'd rather be strung up in a tree and be pecked by crows for all eternity than find out. What the f*** is a Shadowverse? Who are the champions? What battle? Why are they battling? Actually, I take all of that back. Those questions imply intrigue, and in actuality, I'd care more if someone stole my Albi protractor and replaced it with a little protractor. So basically not at all, but fair play to the developers. Nintendo Life scored Shadowverse a 90% rating. I mean, I can't say I'm interested, but I would trust Nintendo Life. The biggest video game scam was not even a game we paid money for. No, rather, we paid for it with our mental energy. Even if you just heard about this title in the weekly rounds of your favourite podcast, thus using up an infinitesimally small amount of mental energy, then you still wasted too much thought on it. The abandoned PS5 saga was borderline hilarious with how insanely one man in his basement scammed the world of their mental energy. As much as I hated this fiasco as it unfolded, a part of me can't help but appreciate the sheer shithousery. So now, with all of those out of the way, allow me to present my favourite games of 2021, starting with the most underrated of gems, before moving on to the official ranking. Right. I am absolutely going to ruffle some feathers here. I already know you will disagree. That much is basically factual. I'm pretty sure I am the only person on Earth with these following opinions. A game's technical state has never really bothered me. As long as it doesn't consistently or unreasonably crash, and as long as those crashes don't have devastating consequences, for example losing one's entire progress, then no, a glitchy game doesn't bother me. For one, I know it'll be fixed. Two, as a hobbyist student developer, I empathise with the people behind the scenes. 3, I know that bugs aren't the result of incompetent developers, but rather unempathetic publishers. As such, fun factor, good storytelling, and rapturing music, excellent visual design, and any of the other criteria many judge a video game off of matter far, far more to me. If a game is inherently good by any of the numerous aforementioned or implied criteria, I want to show the developer support. If, like in, say, a Cyberpunk's case, I don't find criteria in the game I find interesting, then I simply don't. I genuinely don't know the objective best way to show a developer support, but I do know the most genuine, wholesome way. Recommend said game to friends, spread the word on social media, congratulate members of the development team online. Regardless, this game I'm about to mention is buggy, was rushed to market, but is actually quite fun. That simple fact is overshadowed by the controversy, a fact I find frustrating. Battlefield 2042 is the most fun I've had in an online shooter in as long as I can remember. I'm not a competitive player, which figures because a lot of competitive players are frustrated by 2042's performance and glitches and some of its controversial formula changes. I love 2042 because of how immersive it is, how easy it is to get caught up in its overwhelming grandeur. 128 simultaneous players, that is remarkable. Not only that, but I love the visual direction taken with 2042. It is, to my mind, the most visually appealing online shooter to date. Its sound effects lend an immersive quality to the whole experience and instills a fear into the most level-headed of folk. Perhaps it is the simple-minded joy I get derived from movement, but wingsuiting off a building, not even to land a kill, hell, not even to land a shot, is just class. You try again, and again, and again, and eventually you land that wingsuit kill maneuver, and you can bet every unsavory NFT you have locked up on blockchain that I'm saving that clip. All the vehicles are ridiculous amounts of fun to use, the weapons are tuned just right to my taste, and the maps are a sandbox that provide pure, endless inertia. I acknowledge people dislike the deprioritization of classes, and to that I have very little by way of defense. If you're playing with friends in a squad, then this choice actually provides more freedom, as this is why you can customize each other's loadouts to provide optimum synergy. However, playing solo with randoms will likely just lead to headaches. Perhaps if an option was added to quickly and easily view the minute details of your teammates' loadouts on the fly, that would make it easier. Battlefield 2042 is flawed, certainly, but I believe it is far too often overlooked, far too often slandered for being bad, when it is anything but, if not in need of a couple good patches. My next nomination for the underrated category literally has no defense. I know I'm a borderline psychopath for even daring to utter this title's name in a video about the greatest of 2021, but I can and will explain. The most disastrous, embarrassing, buggy, scam-filled, anti-consumer, anti-developer, blatant money-making exercise to be released in video game form this year was, of course, the infamous Grand Theft Auto trilogy. And I thought the 3 games were fun. I've only ever played the originals at cousins' houses, always having been forbidden from touching any video game with anything other than the Nintendo seal of approval emblazoned on the front. So in a time where I wasn't able to spend much time at home, I was delighted to pick up the Grand Theft Auto trilogy on the Switch. I wasn't suckered in, I knew the port jobs were controversial, but I reasoned if these 3 games are the greatest in their genres, then surely a rushed port job couldn't make them worse than their originals. Whether they are in fact worse than the originals is not up to me to decide. I simply do not have the requisite experience with the original titles on their original platforms. However, what I can say is that despite how buggy, glitchy and rushed these remasters were, I fully understand now why they are so highly rated. With the exception perhaps of 3, the Grand Theft Auto games have aged like wine. The fact of the matter is this: even if Nintendo were to demake Super Mario Bros. 1, perhaps using Atari-esque visuals compared to the NES visuals that it had, the remaster would still be fun. If a game is made well enough back in the past, it will only ever be fun. Forever. Every Super Mario 2D side-scroller will always be fun, as will the Zeldas, as will the Metal Gears, and now, as I have come to learn, so will the Grand Theft Autos. I'm having and have had fun with this trilogy. Do I recommend buying it? Well, if you haven't already, it probably isn't for you, in all honesty. It's a terrible remaster job. It's buggier than ever. It got less songs, wonkier physics, and in fact it failed to fix much of anything. The one thing it did promise to fix were the shooting mechanics. I appreciate the change, others did not. Whether you should purchase this collection is entirely subjective. If you are a hobbyist developer, these games are somewhat of an education. If you have nostalgia for these titles, certainly go for it. If you've only got a Nintendo Switch, these are the best and only Grand Theft Auto style open world games. Saints Row is fine, but it just isn't as good, simply put. Certainly a Skyrim or a Breath of the Wild are better choices in the open world genre, but Grand Theft Auto is basically its own subgenre at this point, and the trilogy is the best the Switch has to offer in that subgenre. If you're looking for some fun, high-fidelity, modern open-world games to play over the Christmas break, stay the fuck away from these remasters and buy any other PS4 or Xbox One open-world adventure for less than a third of the price. Red Dead Redemption 2 or Grand Theft Auto 5 by the same company are far better value propositions. Unless you already own them, which, let's face it, you probably do. Moving on with a healthy caveat, I haven't put much time at all into this next particular release. However, we've reached the end of the year, and anecdotally, I know plenty of people who fell head over heels in love with this title. I am not one of those people, but you might turn out to be. As such, I'm just reminding the universe that Miitopia exists, and it's actually good. On the theme of Nintendo titles that the world has forgotten about, Mario Golf Super Rush is a great time all around if you've got friends to share the experience with. If not, don't bother. But if you do, then I guarantee the statements about putting cough cough golf cough cough balls in holes, followed by the inevitable "and what about in the games" by the absolute alpha comedians that will ensue, make this game more than worth it. To conclude this section, the Quake remaster was a viral sensation for a week. For some reason afterwards everyone kind of forgot about it. I implore you, do not forget about this seminal remaster. It is excellent. Normally I would encourage you to pick this up with leftover credit on a Steam voucher. This time I would encourage you to just go buy another Steam voucher. That marks the end of the arbitrary list, and now finally we can get on to what actually matters. What video games were the best in the year 2021? I figure it would be best to point out now that if I could get away with it, I would make my top 3 the Spider-Man PS5 update at 3, the Final Fantasy VII Remake update at 2, and the Last of Us 2 update at 1. Normally getting away with things isn't my number one prerogative, but in this scenario I think I'll just play by the commonly accepted rules, if not, as you'll see, by bending them a tad. Try as I could just barely stretch this list to 9. I regret to say I found making my worst of list a lot easier to be released at a later date. Regardless, here are the 9 best releases of 2021. At its core, Valheim is a great game. It's somewhat derivative, but in the same way a defining game must be. It is the core formula of Minecraft with a heaping of extra special home-cooked sauce. For my taste, that sauce doesn't actually make it better than what it's trying to emulate. Minecraft has, and likely always will, reign supreme in this genre. Nonetheless, Valheim is a good time. While I can't say I'm compelled to revisit it after a fling in the first half of the year, I can say it is far better than most of the other releases this year and is the best launch of an independent survival crafting experience. Fair play to the small but talented team at Iron Gate Studios. I'm not into Monster Hunter. I wasn't before, and in all honesty, I still mightn't be. I don't think I'll be purchasing the DLC for Rise, and the next in the series will need to make compelling changes to draw me in again. However, what is undeniable is how much sheer fun I had with Rise. Monster Hunter is the perfect concoction of grand, flashy, simple action and tense, strategic, punishing combat. It lies in a middle zone between Spider-Man and Dark Souls, and for the mere balance to be struck is an achievement in and of itself. There is no story, there are no characters, there is little to no motivation. Nonetheless, the actual playing of the game is so solid that its reviews simply write themselves. Realistically, if you do your research by watching, reading, and hearing people talk about Monster Hunter, your mind will make itself up for you and it will not be wrong. They say that there are no people who don't like Monster Hunter, there are just people who haven't tried it yet. While I disagree, I will admit there's a nugget of truth. People who haven't yet played Monster Hunter haven't for exactly that reason. They probably already know they won't like it. If you hate anime, you'll steer clear from Persona. If you despise Star Wars, you wouldn't touch a lightsaber fighting game with a 10-foot pole. If you can't stand the craft-like art style of Yoshi and Kirby,
what's wrong with you?
You'll naturally swerve in the opposite direction. You already know if you're going to like Monster Hunter by looking at these clips. If you sit on the fence, there's millions of in-depth reviews from fans more in the know than I. I wouldn't even entertain the idea of recommending this game to someone unless you have a close friend or sibling to play it with. Solo the game has merits, but WarioWare Get It Together comes alive when more than one person is at the wheel. The microgames are all inspired, the party modes are excellent distractions, and the main event of racking up a high score literally never gets old. This is one of Nintendo's finest releases in the party game genre in many a year. High praise indeed. I don't doubt that Forza 5 will surely take home the gong for many. What's most impressive about Forza's mere inclusion in this list is that I don't like cars. At all. I adore sports, mind you. FIFA 22 and or Mario Golf were nose hairs away from being number 10. But I don't think I could manage that kind of stain on my reputation. The most fun I've ever had with a car game in my life was with Need for Speed Most Wanted on the Wii U, mainly because if I squinted hard enough I could pretend I was playing Grand Theft Auto. And yet I've always loved the thrill of movement. Platformers always instill in me a sense of freedom unparalleled by any other genre. It's simply that, by and large, vehicular games don't fire off that same dopamine. Flight Simulator was a dull affair I downloaded with the trial of Game Pass PC to test out my GPU. I deleted it after 20 minutes. I've tried the newer Need for Speeds and always ended up thinking that they had not improved the formula dramatically enough since Most Wanted and Rivals. Gran Turismo, a favourite of a friend of mine, couldn't hold my attention for more than 15 minutes. Neither could any of the Formula 1 simulations over the last decade. Forza Horizon's sibling, Forza Motorsport, had me yawning. I only realised this year, somewhat stupidly, that Forza Horizon and Forza Motorsport were two different subgenres of racing games. After seeing 5's trailer, I picked up Horizon 4 in a sale, and it finally surpassed the joy I had with Most Wanted and Rivals. For the second time in a year, my favourite racing game got usurped. Forza Horizon 5 is now my favourite car racing game of all time, taking over from 4. Not that that opinion is worth much, seeing as I don't like cars, but I digress. I don't tinker with any of the tuning, but I do love to customize the paint jobs and go hundreds of miles per hour down runways. Mexico is the best open world in a car racer to date. Its locales are varied, weather effects stunning, and with ray tracing on, it is simply a sight to behold. All the while, on a Radeon RX 6800 XT, Forza 5 runs like a dream. Job more than well done to Playground Studios. They've converted me. Previously, I said Battlefield 2042 was the most fun I'd had with a shooter in years. That point stands. I personally enjoy 2042 more than Halo Infinite. However, basically nobody feels the same, not because it isn't true, rather mainly because Battlefield 2042 is horrifically optimized on PC, and only those who were lucky enough to get one of the flagship GPUs last year like I did can play the game. That's without considering the terrible console performance. So in much the same way that it's disingenuous of Seth Rogen to tell Casey Neistat that Los Angeles is actually a really nice place as long as, you know, you're a mega rich celebrity with security up the wazoo, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Battlefield 2042 is the best shooter of the year. Despite it being the most fun for me, personally, it's absolutely the most niche and the least polished. I have a feeling that next year, Battlefield 2042.5 will be on my end of year list of recommendations, much like the way Cyberpunk will weasel its way onto some people's lists this year or next year. In the end of the day, this is a list of games I liked but would also recommend. That's why I shouted out 2042 and the GTA trilogy at the start. I love them, but do not recommend them. As against that, I absolutely, wholeheartedly, 100% recommend Halo Infinite's multiplayer. Not the campaign, mind you, but the multiplayer. Overall, on a balance of fun, polish, and good old-fashioned design, Halo Infinite is the strongest shooter of the year. It is less fun than 2042 by default. I love the massive maps and scope of a Battlefield, so anytime a new Battlefield comes out, it'll automatically be my favourite shooter of the year. I'm not proud of it, but that's just the truth. Halo Infinite has a stronger sandbox than 2042, more variety in the modes, better customization options, despite having an objectively poor monetization structure, and a fun factor that came dangerously close to usurping Battlefield's. What's more, it's free. The development team at 343 has done nothing but listen to the fans. Their relationship with the fans is exemplary. They deserve all the support you can give them. I adore sports games. It's my Achilles heel. I love to critique a game or film in a borderline pretentious manner. And yet, I'm partial to FIFA, any Mario sports game, and this year, Riders Republic. Riders Republic isn't just fun, it's wholesome fun. In an industry where even what should be wholesome, for example a car racer like Need for Speed or The Crew, absolutely is not, with police chasing you, gruesome car crashes, law enforcement that will hunt with intent to kill, having a game like Riders Republic where even if your character drops 1,000 feet from the sky and lands on the small of his back, the narrator might crack a joke or your character will shake it off as if to say, you know, that was unpleasant. Then he gets up and goes again. It is the distillation of a video game. It appeals to
the male fantasy,
but you know, for everybody. Why simulate real life when we can simulate so much more? Everything is handled like a joke, which might be off-putting to some, but is so refreshing for me. One might think it's silly and immersion breaking to ride down a hill on skis in a giraffe costume while being tailed by hundreds more also in giraffe costumes, but that's the whole point. Riders Republic doesn't thrive on immersion, rather, it thrives on the metatextual humour of seeing how f***ing ridiculous the situation is. It has confidence in itself. It says, you thought that was wild. You think we can't go any bigger than snowboarding down a mountain, only to jetpack across a canyon? Just you wait till we whip out the pizza bike. Many games break when the all-important immersion breaks. Not Riders Republic. Republic actively makes the effort to try and get the player to press pause so they can just take in the magnitude of what is unfolding before them. This was a game made for the save video clip button. Some video games are art. Riders Republic absolutely is not. But that's what's almost so endearing about it. It is the distillation of a sports fan's fantasy. I ummed and awed about putting Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury on this list, seeing as 3D World came out in 2013. I came up with a compromise. I do recommend you buy Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury on Nintendo Switch despite the game having released in 2013, simply on the strength of its DLC campaign, Bowser's Fury, alone. The main campaign of 3D World is as excellent as you've heard, with improvements that make the original obsolete. The increased movement speed, mid-air dive, and changes to the gamepad functionality make this the definitive way to play Super Mario's best constructed course clear experience to date. But Bowser's Fury is another beast entirely. Bowser's Fury goes for Odyssey's neck and doesn't exactly lose. Instead of a linear course select structure, Bowser's Fury is one massive non-linear level to explore at your own whimsy. For those dying for Super Mario's next mainline 3D adventure, it's already out. Nintendo just hid it behind a re-release of 3D World. Despite only being a couple hours long, Bowser's Fury is well worthy of being in the top 3 of my games of the year list. It's that good. In spite of its short runtime, each second is joyous. Don't be fooled by its moniker. Bowser's Fury is absolutely the main attraction. Animal Crossing 2.0 2.0. It's not Australian. I can already see you face spamming. I am aware that I said before the list began that I wouldn't include updated versions of games that would have been on my list in previous years, but Animal Crossing 2.0 is an exception. Animal Crossing 2.0 simply adds such an extraordinary amount of content that it is basically an entirely new video game. This is Animal Crossing New Horizons, the sequel. There are new islands to explore, new ways to spend Nook Miles, new items, new shops, an entirely new marketplace, new characters. The list goes on and on and on. I could doubtlessly fill a half-hour plus with details on this update, which is exactly what Nintendo did. No filler, just pure details on this update for more than half an hour back in September. I dare say there hasn't been a more substantial update in the history of ever. This is without even considering the paid DLC Happy Home Paradise, a DLC which I believe to be the best DLC ever released for anything ever. Happy Home Paradise and the 2.0 update create a mathematical equation I simply do not have the means to solve. If Animal Crossing 1.0 had an infinite number of options, and then 2.0 doubled those options, then Happy Home Paradise squared those options, then how many possibilities are there now in Animal Crossing? As such, even if you aren't into life sims or crafting games, or you think Nintendo stuff is dumb, just buy Animal Crossing. You literally can't get better value for money anywhere else. I thought the 1.0 release was exceptional, a firework experience. Imagine what I think of it now. Finally, number 1. And could it really have been anything else? I knew Metroid Dread would be my number 1 2 hours into the experience, in fact. The most fun I had playing a game this year was with Animal Crossing 2.0, but you'll have noticed that for someone who values strong storytelling more than almost any other facet of a game, there was a disturbing lack of story-based games on my list. The fact is, no game managed to blend storytelling with fun gameplay in a manner that resonated with me this year. Certainly, Disco Elysium may indeed have the best story in a game ever, but I haven't finished it yet. I don't feel the urge to boot it up because the experience is not enrapturing in the way The Last of Us is. The Last of Us is a perfect chemical construction of a story-based game. There is a reason it's a game and not a movie. The gameplay is used to lend to the cinematic quality of the story, not as a distraction. In Disco Elysium, I'm often left wondering whether it would have been better as a book or film. Perhaps that's ridiculous to some, but that is genuinely the way I feel at this particular moment in time. Bearing in mind, of course, that I haven't finished it. If you do want to make a story game, you'd better justify the game part, or you should just write a book or shoot a short film. It doesn't need to be fun, it rather needs to be substantial. Likewise, Riders Republic is the absolute distillation of fun, but it's lacking in depth. There is no progression, nothing to work towards, no story. Metroid Dread absolutely does not have the best gameplay of the year, and Metroid Dread absolutely does not have the best story of the year. But it has the best melding of the two that I experienced throughout the entirety of 2021, and for that, it absolutely deserves top honor. That isn't to say the gameplay or the storytelling is bad. Mind you, I'd give the gameplay an A and the story a B, but together the game is elevated to an S. Not a firework experience, not an all-timer, not in the uppermost echelon, but absolutely, without a doubt, 100% my game of the year. Thank you for watching, and I really hope you refrain from slandering me for being a tasteless Nintendrone too heavily. There won't be a roundup of the best films of the year because, frankly, there weren't enough. I spent most of this year catching up on older films I'd missed. Regardless, with Christmas and New Year's fast approaching, I thought I'd bestow on you a parting word my priest would share with me and the other children in our youth on the night of Christmas Eve. F*** off before your mother catches you here.